My name is ROR Shmuel Leitman, and I'm going to be discussing Ashkenaz versus Sfarad Minhagim, the what, the when, and the why.
Are you recording?
Yeah, it's being taped. This year's speech, as I just mentioned, I'm going to look into the differences between Ashkenaz and Sfarad customs, why the differences, and what happened to cause this split within Judaism.
Could you speak a little louder?
Thanks.
I'll try to. Last year, I spoke about the Rambam and the development of Sephardi halakha. Is that better? The Rambam even referred to himself as Moshe ben Maimon, the Sephardi, in his introduction to the Mishnah Torah. So obviously, even at that time in the 1100, almost a millennium ago, there was a clear distinction between Ashkenaz and Sfarad. I'm not talking about Sfarad people here who are Ashkenaz who daven in Sfarad. I'm talking about true Sfarad. The word Ashkenaz comes from the name of one of.
You speak louder, please.
Don't shoot yourself, doctor.
I can't help it. I need a microphone.
The microphones on the feet.
Okay. Put this here. Let's see if this is better. The word Ashkenaz comes from the name of one of Noach's great-grandchildren. After the disbursement triggered by Migdal Babel, Ashkenaz or his descendants founded the country we call Germany. Sfarad is very simply the name of the country that in English we call Spain. Spain. The variance in customs between Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews was not a matter of choice, but resulted from the challenging circumstances of Golis that we're still living in, which compelled Jews to scatter throughout the world. Let's briefly review the history. After the Jews were sent into Golis from Eretz Yisrael after the Churban in 70, Common Era, the main Jewish community in the diaspora was Babylonia. It was the only place in the world that Christianity was not rapidly spreading. And therefore the Jews moved there and thrived there. They built their own yeshivas and lived fairly autonomously. Thus, they were free to engage in centuries of scholarship that produced the Mishnah and the Gemara, the Talmud. In the 9th century, the Jewish community in Babylonia began to decline, and many Jews went to North Africa, which was populated by two Muslim tribes, the Berbers and the Moors. The Berbers were fierce warriors, while the Moors were artisans, mathematicians, merchants, the cutting edge of civilization at that time. The Jews saw that they had opportunity, particularly with the Moors, who were less religious and therefore more tolerant. In other Muslim countries where Jews lived, they had to accept the status of dhimmi, which meant second-rate but protected citizens. Their synagogues had to be unobtrusive and they had to keep a low profile. All that changed with the Moors. Their alliance with the Jews lasted almost 400 years, and when the Moors started emigrating from North Africa into Spain, they brought along the Jews not as dhimmis, but as equals. Thus, the Sephardim, or Spanish Jews, lived in an open, intellectually advanced society. The study of philosophy abounded, so the Sephardic Jewish community became philosophical. The Jews also rose in public life, becoming government ministers. An example is the Rambam, who was promoted to the chief court physician to the Sultan of Egypt. Individual Jews sometimes suffered attacks from the Muslim neighbors. Some areas had to relocate, for example, Andalusia in the time of the Rambam, but there were no crusades, no pogroms per se, no Holocaust, at least until the 15th century when the Spanish Inquisition and forced expulsions happened. The Ashkenazic Jew, on the other hand, never had a good day. He lived in a primitive world full of constant danger. Western Europe had sunk into the Dark Ages. Less than 1% of the population was literate. Even the great king Charlemagne, the first to invite the Jews to Europe, could not sign his own name. Charlemagne extended his invitation to the Jews with an offer of land, equal rights, and imperial protection. A small group of Jews left Babylonia around the 9th century and settled in the German Rhineland mainly in the cities of Worms, Fars, and Mainz. Some say actually immigration came through Babel, was not from Babel, but came through Eretz Israel, through Italy, into Germany and France. Because the church converted the native uneducated pagans, Christianity became a religion full of superstition and brutality. This in part gave rise to the Crusades, pogroms, the Black Death. This caused the Jews to migrate within the European continent, looking for safe, at least temporarily safe, harbor. It's amazing that the Ashkenazic Jewry survived those early centuries at all, but not only did it survive, it grew. So while the Sephardim, for the most part, viewed their Muslim neighbors as equals, the Ashkenazim looked at their illiterate Christian neighbors with disdain. They led an insular existence, and their sole intellectual pursuits were the Torah and the Talmud. These very different life experiences led to different methodologies in the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi Batei Midrashim. Generally speaking, the Sephardic Rabbanim looked at the broad picture of Judaism, the forest, not the trees. The Ashkenazim, on the other hand, focused more on the trees than the forest. They concentrated on the words, the nuances, the nitty-gritty of the Talmudic give and take. Therefore, the Rambam's works are philosophical, whereas Rashi's greatness is his ability to take you through the Torah and the Talmud, detail by detail, word by word. Rashi and the Baal Tosfos had great impact on Ashkenazi practice, while the Rif, Rosh, and Rambam exerted profound influence on the Sephardic practice. In addition, Sephardim are heavily influenced by the Arizal, Rav Yitzchak Luria. Sephardim generally follow the halachas of the Rambam, Rosh, and Rif, yet it's interesting to note that there are a number of practices where nearly all Sephardim follow the Arizal rather than Rif and Rambam, which includes the arrangement of the Seder plate, the blowing of the shofar during the Amidah of Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, and the order of the Natnum of the Arba Minim on Sukkot. Despite the physical distances between the Sephardim and Ashkenazim and the difficulties in traveling that time, Sephardi and Ashkenazi Rabbanim were in contact with each other and learned each other's works. The Rambam was familiar with the practices of Jews in Ashkenazic land. As his example in Hilchot Isurei Bia, he quotes the Ashkenazic customs, and the Baalei Tosfos who cite the Rambam in Brachot and Divrei HaMaskal Ha'La'etz. So they were in communication with each other. They did know each other's works. In addition, we have a tshuva of Rabbeinu Tam, who mentions that a few students from Spain had attended the yeshiva of Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom lived in Mainz, a city on the German Rhineland, and died in 1028. In other words, we have evidence that there were students from Spain who traveled and studied in Mainz, a German city, during the early 11th century. Similarly, there are statements found in other rabbinic literature that some students from Spain were attending the yeshiva academies of Ashkenaz, and correspondingly, there are references in Spanish literature of scholars from the French-German world of Ashkenaz coming to Spain. Rav Abraham ben Duad wrote an important work called Sefer HaKabbalah, which has nothing to do with Kabbalah, mysticism, but it was a sefer that delineated the chain of tradition, starting from Moshe Rabbeinu and going through the 1000s. Rabbeinu Avraham ben Duad reports that a certain Rabbi Horogoros, if I got his name proper, of France, an Ashkenazi, a great rabbinic scholar, actually settled in Cordova, Spain, and became a Rebbe teacher of other noteworthy Spanish rabbis. In addition, the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, whose life spanned almost the entire 11th century, refers to a person from eastern France, distant many days' journey, who was appointed as a Rav in southern Spain. Again, despite the distances and hardship of travel time, we see there was a sharing of learning and knowledge between Ashkenaz and Sephardi scholars. Most important is the Jewish people ended up sharing one code of law, the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch itself was composed by Rav Cairo, Yosef Cairo, who resided in Sfat, Israel. It's the main source of halachic practice for Sephardim. The gloss of the Shulchan Aruch is known as the Ramah, was composed by Rav Moshe Israel from Krakow, Poland. That is the main source of halacha for Ashkenazic tradition. Bottom line, Both Sephardim and Ashkenazim share one sefer, one book is the authoritative work of Jewish law. Thus, despite the many years of exile, many miles separating them, Torah leaders made a heroic and successful effort to unite us as one team. While there are certainly differences between the two groups, the differences are vastly outnumbered by what is common between the groups. Rav Chaim Schachter is an Ashkenazi Rav of a Sephardi congregation in Teaneck, New Jersey for the past 24 years. So he knows both sides of the coin. In his book, Bridging Traditions, he estimates that between 90 and 95% of the Sephardic and Ashkenazic practices are the same. The core is identical. The differences, he opines, are limited to the most part of style and nuance. Before going through some of the different Ashkenazic and Sephardi minhagim and their reasons, I'd like to point out that different minhagim within the Jewish people is not a new occurrence. The Mishnah and Gemara are filled with different minhagim, customs based on location. For example, in Pesachim, starts by describing that some locations had the minhag to work on Erev Pesach, while other locations had the minhag not to work on Erev Pesach. If one traveled between the two towns, the Mishnah rules that the person must take the chumrah, the more stringent approach of the place he came from or the place he went to. So, for example, if he lived in a town that did not allow work, but traveled to a town that did allow work, he couldn't work. If he lived in a town that did allow work, but he traveled to a town that didn't allow work, again, he couldn't work. Why I'm quoting this minhag, this halachic change, out of the hundreds that are in the Gemara is just very simply because I was learning this Mishnah with my grandson when I wrote the speech. At that point in time, I'd like to point out that minhagim were based on where you lived, not your father's minhagim. If you permanently moved, you took on the minhagim of the place you moved to. While it's clear minhagim existed at the time of the Mishnah, surprisingly, it seems different minhagim may already existed at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. In Parsha Shoftim, the pasuk says, "Shoftim v'shotrim titein lecha b'chol sha'arecha asher Hashem lokecha nosein lecha l'shvotecha v'shoftu et ha'am mishpat tzedek." The pasuk instructs us to set up justices and police in each and every gate, meaning city, as well as each and every shevet, tribe. The Ramban questions, if you have courts in every city, why do you need courts for every tribe, for every shevet? He answers that if you have a city that is part in the land of one shevet and part in the land of a different shevet, for example, Yerushalayim, which is partially in Yehuda and partially in Binyamin, people living in those cities needed to have courts that could enforce the slightly different rulings, the slightly different minhagim of the different shvatim who are living within the same city. The Rambam holds that each shevet based in their courts were authorized to issue distinct laws, rulings, and customs that for each shevet's unique needs. I must again say it's amazing that even at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, when law was first given out, already there were different customs being developed. While customs by shevet, like in our time, were passed down from father to son, you must remember that at that time, each shevet lived within their own boundaries. And once again, minhagim really were location-based. Also remember at the time they had the laws of Yovel. So if somebody did move out from their area at the time of Yovel, 50th year, everybody went back to their celestial homelands. Again, back to location-based. So if the Mishnah rule, one took on the minhagim of the location he lived, when did it switch, for most of us at least, to following our father's minhagim? Rav Yosef Cairo, author of the Shulchan Aruch, wrote in response to dealing with Ashkenazim that moved into a Sephardic community that they must observe the minhagim of the Sephardic community. Again, location. Rav Shmuel de Medina, also known as the Maharaj Sham, somewhat disagreed with this ruling, saying that if an entire community moves into a town with different minhagim, or someone moved into a community that had no minhagim, then they do maintain their family minhagim. This sets the stage for our current situation. Many people were relocated. Some were forced to relocate, some en masse to a particular location, others to locations that didn't have an established minhag. For example, America. People in communities that moved to America found no local customs, Thus, the ruling of the Mahar Darsham applied, and they kept their families minhagim. I simplified the change following your father's minhagim instead of minhagim replaced. There was much ink spilled on this topic, with many opinions cited, but this seems to be the most consistent. Nevertheless, American immigrants did follow their father's minhagim, as well as the more recent immigration into Eretz Israel, where Rav Kook was quoted as opining that Ashkenazim should maintain their pronunciation and their minhagim and not switch to the Sephardic pronunciations and minhagim. Okay, we discussed the when and the why, so now let's look into the what. Several of the different customs and the reasons behind it. Let's start with the famous one, naming children after the living. Ashkenazic Jews do not name their children after someone who's alive. Moreover, they won't name after a deceased individual if a close living relative has the same name. The reason is there is an ancient and widespread custom to name children after deceased parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. So naming after a living person could appear as if you're waiting for that person to die. God forbid. In addition, according to Jewish law, it's not the improper respect to call one's parents by his or her first name. Giving a child the name of a living parent or grandparent would generate confusion and a belittlement of this respect. Sephardic Jews, on the other hand, do name their children after living relatives, and it's very much of an honor for that relative. We see in the Torah that Terach, the father of Abraham, on appropriate timing, named his son Nahor during the lifetime of his father, Nahor. In addition, the Talmud records a case of a mother concerned about the circumcision of her third son when the two older sons died as a result of circumcision. Rav Natan gave sage advice that was followed, and the child lived and was named Natan Habavli. The inclusion of this story in the Gemara shows that the name given to this child, of this Rav who was still alive, was an act of honor to the Rav and certainly not a sinful act. Another obvious difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim is the way they pronounce Hebrew. This gets interesting. First, again, this is not a new phenomenon. Even at the time of the Shoftim, the judges, we find that members of different tribes pronounce Hebrew differently. There's a story in Shoftim, Parak 12, Pasuk 5, that illustrates this. It describes that at the time, people from the Shevet of Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, were not able to or did not pronounce the letter Shin. Gemara also speaks about errors in pronunciation. In Megillah, Chazal state that residents of Beit Shan and Haifa do not pronounce the ayin and aleph correctly and therefore should not duchen, the Kohanic bracha, nor should they serve as a shliach tzibur. Remember, at the time of the Mishnah and Gemara, Hebrew was not the primary spoken language of the population. It was generally used for holy purposes only, not being used by the general population for normal conversation, certainly allowed for the correct or at least original pronunciation of the spoken language to get somewhat lost and confused. Nevertheless, let's continue to look into the why and when Sephardim and Ashkenazim developed their own pronunciation. As you know, Hebrew letters only include consonants, not vowels. Around the year 700 CE, various systems for writing vowels were developed. What most people don't know, myself included until I researched this, is that at least 3 different notation systems for denoting vowels, or nekudot as we call them, were invented for Hebrew, each in a different center of Jewish society. In manuscripts, one finds the Babylonian vocalization developed in Babel, Babylonia, the Palestinian vocalization developed in most of Israel, and the Tiberian vocalization developed in Tiberias, which at that time was the center of biblical scholarship. All these systems came into being at around the same time. The Tiberian notation was later universally accepted as 7 different vowel systems. These are the nekudot that we all have when we see in Hebrew. The Babylonian vocalization has only 6 vowels. The Palestinian has only 5. The traditional Sephardic pronunciation most closely corresponds to the Palestinian notation, as it doesn't distinguish between a patach and a kamatz, nor does it distinguish between a segol and a tzeri. Similarly, it's clear that the traditional Taimani pronunciation is descended from the Babylonian vowel system, which uses 6 vowels. I have a little bit of a handout. Pass them around, put them out. The handout shows samples of the Babylonian and Palestinian vocalization. This was found in the Cairo Geniza. Note that both of these methods of vocalization actually put the nekudot, those little dots, the vowels, on top of the letters, as opposed to what we do now. I'll give a moment for people to see that. With that said, despite there having been a significant amount of Sephardic and Ashkenazic interactions over time, there really wasn't any mention of any difference in dialect in the numbers of shilos and shuvos, the number of correspondents that went back and forth. We do see numerous mentions of the different customs, but there's no mention about different pronunciations, which is very interesting. One may assume that for hundreds of years, the pronunciations were at least very similar. In fact, some translations of Ashkenazic Sforim into Latin as late as the 13th century seem to infer that Ashkenazim pronounced Hebrew very similar to Sephardim. Unfortunately, after a lot of research, I found no definitive answer as to why and when the pronunciation diverged. One opinion is that when the Tiberian notation of the Kudot was universally accepted, Ashkenazim wanted to differentiate between each unique vowel, each unique liquid, and they used Yiddish or the Judeo-German sounds, while Sephardim did not feel a need to do so. Other research has led to other timelines and other reasons. Bottom line, don't ask which pronunciation is most correct. Same can actually be said for English. Different pronunciations of the British, the Australian, South African, or even within the US, like Boston or Boston, umbrella or umbrella. Which is the closest to the original Old English? Probably not. I found some sources claiming Yemenite is the most accurate pronunciation. Other sources saying Sephardi is the most correct. And even some sources saying Ashkenazic is the most correct. Dealer's choice. Found it fascinating that not only are there different customs like how we pronounce or how we do some rituals, but there are some differences that actually impact kashrus. Here are a few halachic differences between Sephardi and Ashkenazi. Note, I am not paskening for anyone. Please ask your local Orthodox rabbi for any halachic question. The Shulchan Aruch rules that if chametz utensil was accidentally used on Pesach, the food may be eaten if the utensil was not previously used for chametz between the past 24 hours. In halacha, this is called eino ben yomo, not within the day. This is because the tam, the taste, of the chametz that was absorbed into the utensil becomes stale after 24 hours of elapsed, and it loses halachic significance. Note that this pot or pan may not be used intentionally, it's called l'chatchila on Pesach, unless kosher, because of a rabbinic decree. But if it was used accidentally, the eved, the food remains kosher. On the other hand, the Ramah rules that even if a chametz utensil is not used for 24 hours, again in the Yomo, the food is forbidden and may not be eaten on Pesach. The Ramah agrees that during year-round, if the utensil was used accidentally for non-kosher food and then kosher food was prepared in it, more than 24 hours later, the food is kosher, again, b'diavad, not on purpose, but accidentally. But rules that govern Pesach are more stringent. So here's an example. On Pesach, I accidentally stirred my kosher Pesach pot of soup with a clean chametz spoon. Spoon hasn't been used for 24 hours. Can I eat the soup? A Sephardi can eat the soup and continue using the pot. An Ashkenazi must throw away the soup and put the pot away. Next, I'll discuss something called ROR Shmuel, primary use. A chametz utensil that is commonly used with heat cannot be used on Pesach unless it's kosher beforehand. We all know. If it's used with cold chametz, it can be scrubbed clean and then used for Pesach. What if the primary use is cold, but occasionally it's used for hot? The Shulchan Aruch rules that the halachic status is determined by the primary use. Again, this is called rov tashmisho in halacha. Thus, a chametz utensil that is ordinarily used for cold food, but on a rare occasion is used for hot, it can be used on Pesach without koshering it if it's properly clean. There's one caveat: the utensil must not have been used with chametz in the past 24 hours. Why should that work? Why rov tashmisho obviate the need of koshering despite the use of hot chametz? The answer is the same as before. Once 24 hours have elapsed, food cooked in the chametz pot is always kosher according to Sephardic tradition. The requirement to kosher that vessel after 24 hours is only rabbinic. As such, the Sephardi rabbis instituted a leniency that halachic status of utensils is based only on the primary use. The Ramah, Ashkenazic, disagrees. According to the Ramah, one must kosher a utensil used even once for chametz. Moreover, the Ramah is strict even if the person is not sure if they use that utensil ever. So here's an example. A kiddush cup usually used for cold, but occasionally it's washed in hot water together with chametz dishes. How should one prepare a silver kiddush cup for Pesach? A Sephardi can prepare a silver kiddush cup by scrubbing it clean, as long as it wasn't used with chametz in the past 24 hours. An Ashkenazi must kosher the cup by pouring boiling water on it. This also impacts how to kosher a ceramic sink. The Shulchan Aruch writes that earthenware, Paris is called, utensils cannot be kosher for Pesach or year-round if it's used with heat. It's generally accepted that porcelain, china, modern-day ceramics are included in this category as well. Ashkenazim cannot kosher a ceramic sink, since the temperature is occasionally hot. On the other hand, Rabbi Avodia Yosef writes that Sephardim can use a ceramic sink for Pesach because Sephardim are lenient with rov tashmisho. Rov tashmisho use of a sink is cool water, not too hot, not too hot to hold, which is called the atzaletis in Hebrew. And that's considered cold in halacha. Still, Rav Avodia Yosef writes that for Pesach, boiling water should be poured over the surface 3 times. Presumably, when dealing with Pesach, they're concerned with some absorption of the chametz, even on the cold ceramic or earthenware surface. Next, koshering glass. The Shulchan Aruch writes that glass utensils need not be koshered for Pesach, even if they're used with hot chametz. This is because glass does not absorb and is therefore sufficient to scrub them clean. Contemporary poskim, including Rav Avodia Yosef, write that the same applies to Pyrex, even if you're cooking directly on the fire. The Ramah disagrees and holds that glass does absorb. Moreover, since glass is made from sand, it's viewed like ceramic and therefore can't be kosher. So I have an example. If I have a chametz set of glasses and bowls that may be used for Pesach, the Sephardi can use these utensils after scrubbing them clean. No koshering required. An Ashkenazi cannot use those utensils. There's no way to kosher them for Pesach. An example that pertains to here: how could a glass stovetop be kosher? A Sephardi can use the glass stovetop after scrubbing it clean. No koshering required. An Ashkenazi must clean the stovetop surface well, not use it for 24 hours, and on Pesach, pots cannot be put directly on the glass surface. Some suggest aluminum, some suggest copper discs, or something like that placed under the pot. A reminder, I am not poskening. Ask a local Orthodox rabbi for rules. Final halakha difference I'll discuss is koshering chametz utensils when they are still ben yomah, when they were still used within the past 24 hours. The Shulchan Aruch rules that one can kosher chametz utensils if it's done before the 5th hour on Erev Pesach, when you still are allowed to eat chametz, even if these utensils were used in the past 24 hours. The Ramah agrees in principle with the Shulchan Aruch that it should be acceptable, but he writes the custom of the Ashkenazim is not to kosher any utensil without waiting the full 24 hours. Sephardim don't have that custom. Though there are reasons to wait the 24 hours, it would be more proper. Strictly speaking, there is no need for a Sephardi to do it. So if I cook chametz in a pot on Erev Pesach, can I still kosher that pot for Pesach? A Sephardi can kosher the pot with hagolah before the 5th hour of Erev Pesach. Custom of an Ashkenazim is not to kosher the pot, put it away. Okay, let's change gears here, enough with halakha, and discuss some differences on how we act in shul. During the recitation of Kaddish, Ashkenazim always stand, while Sephardim do not always stand. There are three sources for this Ashkenazic practice to stand. The Ramah records the practice of standing. He cites the Talmud Yerushalmi as the source of this practice. The Yerushalmi in turn cites the unlikely role of Eglon, who was the king of Moab, and he stood when Ehud ben Gera announced to him he came bearing a message from Hashem to him. Yerushalmi states that following this example, we should stand for Amen Yehishmei Rabbah, as well as any other Davar Kedusha, things that require a minion to say, for example, Baruchu, Kedusha, etc. If a non-Jewish king Eglon was respectful and stood when he heard the name of Hashem, the Gemara argues, how much more should we stand? Second, in the Beis trial of a Magadeh for blasphemer, someone who's cursing Hashem, the Mishnah states that the most prominent of the witnesses must stand when they state the name of Hashem, that is first. The judges in turn also must stand and rip their clothing. Third is Bilam's instruction to Balak. Bilam said to Balak, Kum Balak, Yishma, stand up Balak and listen, when he was going to tell over to Balak what Hashem had told him, which of course includes the famous motto. The Midrash states that based on this, we are not permitted to sit when the words of Hashem are proclaimed. Sfardim followed the practice of the Arizal, as reported by his student Rav Chaim Vitel in Shar HaKavana, to sit during Kaddish. Rav Chaim Vitel testifies that the Arizal shockingly said that Yerushalmi cited by the Ramah is not authentic. Explaining the Sephardic custom, the Chassam Sofer defends it based on the Gemara regarding bowing during the Shemona Esrei. Gemara states that an individual bows in the Shemona Esrei at the beginning and conclusion of the brachot of Avot and Hoda'ah, Modim, which is what we all do. A Kohen Gadol does so at the beginning and end of every single bracha, but a king must remain in the bowing position throughout the entire Amidah. Accordingly, the fact that Eglon, who was a king, stood for the message of Hashem does not conclusively prove that everyone must stand for Dvar Kedusha. Maybe only a king needs to stand. Continuing with Tefillah, where I'm not going to talk about all the differences in this act, but that will take a while. The second bracha of the Shemona Esrei during the summer months, Sfardim add Morid Hatal, while Ashkenazim do not. The reason being that the Gemara clearly states that it's optional to insert Morid Hatal in the summer, since unlike rain in Israel, dew does not cease to fall. Therefore, the Chachamim did not obligate us to say Morid Hatal. No need to pray to Hashem for dew. It's going to come in any event. Sfardim added for a couple of reasons. One is a Tosfos and Brachos that says there's a significant advantage to reciting Morid Hatal. Yerushalmi states that one must repeat the Shemona Esrei if he omitted Masha Baruch U'Marda Geshem. He didn't say it in its proper time. However, he need not repeat the Shemona Esrei if he accidentally said Morid Hatal instead. Tosfos notes that there are those who say Morid Hatal all year round, so they wouldn't have to be concerned with repeating the Shemona Esrei if they omitted Masha Baruch. Second is, despite not having to pray for dew to fall, we're praying that it will fall for a bracha, and not chas v'sholom for a curse or a ploa, because the Gemara actually says sometimes dew can be ra'ot, bad. Third, the Beis Yosef adds that Sfardim say Morid Hatal year round, since the Gemara notes Tal is desirable year round, unlike rain, which in Israel could be a siman ploa, a bad omen if it falls after Nisan. That's Gemara times. In addition to, it's interesting to note that Hasidim and many Ashkenazic shuls in Eretz Yisrael have adopted the Sephardic minhag. This is based on the Vilna Gaon, who states that while the Talmud Bavli supports the Ramah, Talmud Yerushalmi seems to support the Sephardic practice of saying Morid Hatal. It's also interesting to note that Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik himself accepted this minhag as well, and explained his practice as following the advice of the Tosfos. Next, we conclude Shachris every day with the Shir Shoyom, the daily song that the Levium sang every day in the Beis HaMikdash. You would think this would be the same for everyone. There was no confusion as to what was said in the Beis HaMikdash. It's in Tehillim. You know it is. However, on Wednesdays, while we all say Tehillim 94, Ashkenazim conclude by adding the first three psukim, the first three sentences of Tehillim 95. This was introduced by the Arizal, since Tehillim 94 ends with God will destroy them. The Arizal did not want to end on such a downer. Interestingly, usually Sephardim follow the Arizal, but in this case, Ashkenazim did. Sephardim simply say what was said in the Beis HaMikdash. There's no concern with reading, with concluding with bad news for Paraniot, since Sephardic Jews always append the positive plea Hoshienu Hashem Elokeinu after every Shir Shayom. The last difference in Nusach I'm going to discuss is the Yatzmach Prokrine V'Karei Mashiach. Sephardim include this phrase in Kaddish. We've all heard that, right? Sephardim and Haig. While Ashkenazim do not. This disparity is very old. The Rambam in his Siddur and the Siddur of Rav Saadia Gaon include these words, Yatzmach Prokrine V'Karei Mashiach, in their Kaddish. Other ancient sources, however, including the Siddur of Rav Amram Gaon, Machzeh Vitri, do not include this phrase in Kaddish. Sephardim include Yatzmach Prokrine V'Karei Mashiach because these words present the opportunity to express one's yearning for the Mashiach. As the Rambam writes, not only do we believe in the Mashiach, but we yearn for his arrival. Ashkenazim, on the other hand, feel the omission of mentioning the Mashiach emphasizes the ultimate goal of the Mashiach era, which is that Hashem will rule over the world. Moreover, the Ashkenazic version of Kaddish emphasizes the pressing need of the arrival of the Messianic era. Whoops. Sorry. To correct the enormous Chilul Hashem that results from our status in exile. The Kaddish paraphrases the words of Yecheskel, V'higdalti, v'higdashti, v'einei goyim rabim. I'll be announced and sanctified before the eyes of many nations. Indeed, Yecheskel repeatedly teaches that it is Kiddush Hashem that will propel the arrival of the Messianic era. This is the emphasis of Kaddish, according to Nusach Ashkenaz. Okay, we discussed some differences in Nusach. Let's continue on a similar track and discuss, can we count a katan, a child, to complete a minyan or a mezuzah for benching? The difference is based on the understanding of a very complicated Gemara in Brachot, which discusses a katan, a child, being counted for a mezuzah. That's in benching. Based on his understanding of the Gemara, the Rambam rules a katan who knows, understands who we are praying to can be counted for mezuzah, but not for a minyan. The Tosfos and Bear are very complicated, and I won't go through them. But the bottom line is there are more rules that a katan cannot serve as either the third or 10th in the zimun. Interesting, though, there are more rules that it is possible to count a katan for, while it's not possible to count a katan for a zimun, he allows counting a katan as the 10th for a minyan, if the katan is holding a chumash. The Ramah's reasoning may be that there's never really a truly pressing need to conduct a zimun. However, there may be a need in the community to have a minyan. As you can infer, the Sephardim follow the Rambam and will include a katan for a zimun, but not for a minyan. Ashkenazim follows the Ramah and will never count the katan for a zimun, but in cases of great need, will count the katan holding a chumash for a minyan. Do we wear only Rashi tefillin or both Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam? Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam dispute the order in which the last of the two parshas should be placed in the tefillin. Rashi maintains the parsha of Shema should precede that of V'hayim Shemoah, while Rabbeinu Tam holds V'hayim Shemoah is first and precedes the Shema. Interestingly, in the 20th century archaeological excavations of the Dead Sea area, both tefillin were discovered. The Shulchan Aruch cites the Smag and other Rishonim who observed the common practice is to follow Rashi. Nevertheless, the Shulchan Aruch says that a God-fearing man should don both the Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Kabbalic sources strongly support wearing both Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. The Ben Ish Chai writes that the Arizal reports a tradition from Eliyahu HaNavi that both approaches are correct and both sets of tefillin should be worn, and quotes that both sets were worn from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu through the Goanic era. He proceeds to quote the Zohar that states that both pair of tefillin are necessary. Accordingly, in many Sephardic communities, it became common for men to wear both Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, as noted by the Chidah. Also common for Hasidic Jews, as noted before, halachic practices of Hasidim and Sephardic are significantly impacted by Kabbalistic consideration. However, Non-Hasidic Ashkenazic circles, a different approach is taken following the view of the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon was resolute in his endorsement of the opinion only wearing Rosh Tefillin. In fact, when he was challenged as to why he doesn't don the Tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam, the Vilna Gaon replied, if we wish to accommodate all opinions, we'd have to wear 64 pair of tefillin. The Mishnah Berurah cites the Rambam's the Vilna Gaon's ruling in accordance with Rashi and does not cite any dissenting opinion. Thus, most Sephardim wear both pair of tefillin, while most Ashkenazim, non-Hasidic at least, wear only Rashi. While talking about tefillin, how many brachot do we say on tefillin? This is one of the differences between Sephardic and Ashkenazic practices. Roots also go way back. Rashi, the Rif, Rambam argue that under ordinary circumstances, only one bracha, lahaniach tefillin, is recited. Rabbeinu Tam and Rosh, however, maintain that the bracha of lahaniach tefillin is recited on the tefillin shel yad, and the bracha of al mitzvah tefillin is al rosh, I'm putting on your head. Rav Yosef Cairo rules in accordance with Rashi, Rif, and the Rambam. The Ramah, however, notes that the custom of Ashkenazi communities to follow Rabbeinu Tam and Rosh. Sephardim follow the Shulchan Aruch and recite only one bracha on tefillin, where Ashkenazim follow the Ramah and recite two brachos. In actuality, there is Talmudic support for both options. The Ashkenazic practice draws solid support from the Gemara and brachos, which, when presenting the order of the brachos to be recited upon awakening, specifically instructs that when placing the tefillin in the arm, the bracha of lahaniach is recited, and when placing the tefillin in the head, the bracha of al mitzvah tefillin is recited. However, the Gemara in the Nachot serves as solid support for the Sephardic approach. The Gemara states that if one does not pluck between putting the tefillin shel yad on and tefillin shel rosh on, which is the proper conduct you're not supposed to do, then one only recites one bracha. You only have to do the second bracha if you were interrupted with conversation. While on the topic of brachas, I was very surprised to find out that there's a difference in what bracha to make on matzah. Doesn't everybody make hamotzi on matzah? Surprisingly, the predominant Sephardic practice, we just talked about it, is to recite the bracha of mizonos on eating matzah at times other than Pesach. This follows the ruling of the Chidah, as confirmed by Rav Avodia Yosef. The halacha recognizes a category of food known as pas haba b'kismin. Let's just call it like a snack bread. The Shulchan Aruch includes cake, pie, crackers in this category. One recites the bracha of mizonos on this pas haba b'kismin, unless he is koveya suda, he makes a meal out of that item. I'll describe what that means a little later. Since matzah is essentially a cracker, Sephardim regard matzah as pas haba b'kismin, so therefore they recite mizonos. Interestingly, they recite hamotzi on matzah on Pesach, even when large amounts are not consumed. Why should Pesach be different than other times of the year? The answer is very simple. Matzah is the only bread you have from Pesach. There is no other bread. Thus, during this time, hamotzi is recited on it. Along other lines, Rav Avodia rules that on Motzei Pesach, after Pesach, before you repurchase your chametz, the bracha still is hamotzi on matzah. Explaining the Ashkenazic practice, Rav Eliezer Waldenberg explains Ashkenazic practice to recite hamotzi and matzah year-round is even if you eat it as a snack. The reason is one is accustomed to treating matzah as bread on Pesach, so Ashkenazim regard it as bread throughout the entire year. Essentially, then, Sephardim and Ashkenazim debate whether the status of matzah as bread during Pesach spills over to the rest of the year. Regarding the soft matzah that Sephardim make, Rav Moshe Halevi notes that even Sephardic Jews should recite hamotzi and brachas hamazon on soft matzah, because can never be called a cracker, even if it gets hard, since originally it was soft and was not a cracker. Okay, while we're on the topic of bread, what bracha do you make on egg challah? The widespread minhag of Sephardic community is only to use water challah, not egg challah, for lechem mishnah on Shabbos. This is due to the ruling of Rav Yosef Cairo to recite mizonos, not hamotzi, on bread kneaded in fruit juice or eggs, as he considers it pas haba b'kismin. That's not bread we discussed before. and thus reciting a bracha of mizonos, unless he's kovei suda, he makes a meal out of it. Okay, I twice mentioned kovei suda. What is meant by kovei suda? Svardim require the amount of egg matzah to be eaten to be considered hamotzi would be an entire half of a loaf as defined by the Gemara, which is the equivalent of 216 grams or half a pound of that matzah before you'd make hamotzi. Ashkenazim, however, combine all of the food in the meal with that half of a pound to be considered kovei suda. There are more rules that one recites hamotzi only over sweetened bread, which is the practice of Ashkenazim. So for Shabbos meal, Sephardim can only use water challah or other non-sweetened challahs. A Sephardic Jew would recite hamotzi on these sweetened challahs only if he were to eat the entire half a pound of that sweetened matzah. The sweetened bread, rather, to be considered kovei suda. Ashkenazim can happily enjoy their big challah. One day, my daughter brought home a friend from high school for Shabbos, who was a true Sephardi. That friend, Karen, brought a woman sitter with her. It looked quite unique, so I asked if I could check it out. I was shocked to see that there were virtually no brachos for Shem and Malchus, no bracha saying Hashem, Bracha Olam. I was shocked. I never saw anything like that before. What's this all about? All Rishonim agree that women are exempt from performing most mitzvahs that are an aseh shazman grama, a positive mitzvah that is time bound. They, however, dispute whether a woman may or should recite a bracha if she voluntarily performs a mitzvah. Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh argue that a woman may recite a bracha if they choose to do the mitzvah. He maintains that the tzivanu is in the plural, so it refers to the Jewish people as a whole, including women. Thus, a woman can thank God for commanding us to perform mitzvahs aseh shazman grama. In contrast, the Rambam rules they may not. Rav Yosef Cairo rules in accordance with the Rambam, while the Ramah follows Tosfos and Rosh. Almost all of Ashkenazic authorities rule in accordance with the Ramah, and Ashkenazic women thus do recite brachas if they're doing the time-bound mitzvah by picking up the whole Hashrab. In Sephardim, it's actually a hotly debated issue till today. Rav Avodia Yosef, excuse me, vigorously argues that Sephardic women should follow the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch and refrain from saying a bracha in such circumstances. The Chida noted that some Sephardic women who reside in Eretz Yisrael did begin reciting brachas before performing mitzvahs. Aseh shazman grama. The Chida argues that with such of a large number of Rishonim, including the Ramban, the Rashba, the Ritva, the Ran, the Rif, all rule in accordance with Tosfos. The Chida cites a colorful work known as Tshuvot Min HaShemayim, whose author reports that a heavenly voice informed him in a dream that women may recite brachos and positive time-bound mitzvahs. The Chida proceeds to argue that had Rav Yosef Cairo been aware of this Tshuvot Min HaShemayim, he certainly would have ruled in accordance with Tosfos and the majority of the Rishonim that do permit women to recite a bracha. In practice, many Sephardim follow the Chida, as opposed to the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch. While there are some who do follow the Shulchan Aruch literally, Karen was obviously from that latter group. What we doing in time? Okay. Talking about brachos, both Ashkenaz and Sephardim recite Chatzi Hallel and Rosh Chodesh on the last 6 days of Pesach. But while Ashkenazim recite a bracha on Hallel, Chatzi Hallel, most Sephardim do not. What is the source of that divergent practice? The Gemara in Arachin outlines the days that we were mandated to say Hallel. 8 days of Sukkot, 8 days of Chanukah, Shavuos, the first day or days of Pesach. The custom to recite Hallel on Rosh Chodesh in the last 6 days is recorded in the Gemara that it's a minhag but not mandated by law. The Gemara records that when Rav first arrived in Babylonia from Eretz Yisrael, he was shocked to discover locals reciting Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. He initially thought to stop them, but was satisfied when he saw that they were skipping portions of Hallel. He concluded it's a local custom, and therefore it's acceptable. Eventually, the reciting of Chatzi Hallel on Rosh Chodesh and the last days of Pesach became a universally accepted practice. Despite it being a universal practice, the Rishonim debate whether bracha should be said on it. The Rambam rules that one does not make a bracha on Chatzi Ha'olam because it's merely a minhag. The Machzor Vitri records that Rashi also said no bracha should be said on Chatzi Ha'olam. However, Rabbeinu Tam on the other hand, believes that one should recite a bracha on Chatzi Ha'olam, as he maintains that one does recite a bracha on the minhag. Both sides marshal proof in the Gemara to support their respective opinions. Rashi and the Rambam point to a Gemara in Sukkah, which states we do not say a bracha when we beat those rubbles on the ground on Hoshana Rabbah, because it's just a minhag. Rabbeinu Tam points out that it is our practice to recite brachos for people living outside of Eretz Yisrael on the second day of Yom Tov. We also say the brachos, even though we observe Yom Tov Sheni as a custom now. There are more rules in accordance with the Rabbeinu Tam. Notes that it's accepted custom among Ashkenazi Jews to say the bracha, and that's the universally accepted among the Ashkenazim. The Shulchan Aruch quotes actually both customs. Therefore, Sephardim have a split decision. Those living in Eretz Yisrael and neighboring countries, including Egypt, Yemen, Syria, follow the Rambam and do not say a bracha. Moroccan and Turkish Jews, however, rule in accordance with the other opinion and do say a bracha. There are quite a few other differences between Ashkenaz and Sephardic traditions. I simply researched and limited my discussions to those that I found personally. Thank you. Any questions?
There are certain mitzvahs that just women do. So how do they say that a woman shouldn't say bracha?
A woman doesn't say any bracha on a mitzvah that is time dependent. According to the Gemara, a woman is exempt from it. Example again is lulav and esrog. An example is eating in the sukkah. There are quite a few different examples. A hafresh tal can be done at any time, whenever you want to do it. There isn't. It's not a time dependent. You can only take the lulav and esrog during sukkos. I can't just pick up a lulav and esrog right now and make a bracha, right? Anytime you want, you can take power. You can make it anytime. So it's not a time dependent one. You can do it anytime you want. There's a distinction between those.
And what language do they speak?
Aramaic. At the time of Mishnah Gemara, they spoke Aramaic, which is why the Gemara is written in Aramaic. Okay, thank you all.
So